Well, welcome everyone to our webinar, Translating Economic Impact Reports into Real Grassroots Action. This webinar is specifically designed for developers of utilities scale energy projects. Just a few logistical things before we get started. The Q&A feature on Zoom has been activated, so you should be able to go in and ask any questions you have as our session gets started. We will answer those questions at the end of our presentations. So we'll have a Q&A portion at the tail end of the webinar. This is being recorded and we'll email this out to all attendees once we have that available. I'm going to introduce both of our speakers here. We've got Jonathan Callaway, CEO of Recall Strategies. Jonathan Callaway is a seasoned political strategist and public affairs leader who has transformed how renewable energy projects succeed in America. With over 15 years of experience spanning federal, state, and local campaigns across more than 30 states, he has developed unparalleled expertise in navigating complex political landscapes and advancing major infrastructure projects. And then we also have Dr. David Loomis, who is president of Strategic Economic Research. He's also Emeritus Professor of Economics at Illinois State University and co-founder of the Center for Renewable Energy. Dr. Loomis has over 20 years of experience in energy analysis and has performed economic development analyses at the county, region, state, and national levels for many different energy projects and associated supply chains. Dr. Loomis received his PhD in economics from Temple University in 1995. Jonathan and Dave, I'll let you take it away.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Jonathan Callaway, CEO of Recall Strategies. Just a little bit of a background. I know Ethan talked through it, but we we have been in the industry for about a decade, permitting on the ground. Some of the largest utility projects across 42 states, everything from wind, solar, transmission, BESS, a little bit of natural gas when we're asked to. So yeah, it's really great to be here.
Great, and it's great to have you on the webinar. We've worked a lot together, and especially together in the early days of projects. One of the things that I wanted to get just out of the way, just because sometimes people haven't seen economic impact reports. So I just wanted to show what those kind of look like. You're sick of them, Jonathan. But as we look at this, one of the things that we started doing was to do just a 2-page handout. And in some cases, just a preliminary look at the very early stage, because a lot of the tax benefits, if you know that it's going to be a 300 megawatt wind project, you kind of roughly know we can use industry guidelines to say what is that going to cost. And then obviously, depending on the state, the tax regime might be different. But this is kind of what it looks like. So I wanted to have that visual. But then if we do a full report, that would have all of those numbers in it and a full 40-page report and going into the background of the county and so forth. But it's a lot of numbers. It's a lot of tables of numbers. So Jonathan, I was wondering if you could explain like how you take our numbers and make them real to stakeholders and people on the ground.
Yeah, it's kind of, when we first started talking about this, it was kind of a little bit interesting because we are so niche in that when we first started, we were, basically living on project sites, right? Knocking on individuals' doors, having, conversations with stakeholders. And I think politics 101 is that when you're in a community is finding out what people care about and then making your project about that thing, right? You don't want it to only be about the wind project. You want it to be about the benefits that those projects bring. But when you talk about numbers, most people don't know what that means, right? If you're asking the average person, what's the difference in the, municipal budget of $13 million or $15 million, I don't think they could really tell you. I'm sure that, the county board could, the some of the municipal leaders definitely, like county board staff or, the townships or the, local, road use commissioner could, but to the average person, the numbers are, sort of inconsequential. What they think about is the things that they're missing in their daily life, right? So when you knock on a door, you talk to a stakeholder and you take the time to listen, they'll tell you what the issues in their community are. And it's translating those economic numbers into those things. What is the county board going to spend the money on? Is it reducing taxes for everybody? Is it increasing services to the schools? Is it, bringing in ambulance services that we're missing? I can talk about a specific case where, the county didn't have enough uh, ambulances for the residents, and they were doing life flights that was costing, the county a ton of money. Um, it's really getting down into like listening and figuring out what are the things that people care about, and then making those economic reports translate to what they care about. And then what you're doing is you're taking these wind farm votes or these solar votes or these best votes, and you're turning them into actionable votes that bring real benefit in a way that the community understands, right? um, this vote is, I'll give you, we did, most of the examples we did together, so we were on the ground together at the hearings together. So I'll give you an example that's pretty close to home for you, in that we had a hard vote on a wind project where the community was split on whether they wanted to see it come through. What they did really want, though, even more than that, was to make sure their school didn't consolidate and ship rural students to an urban center an hour and a half away, which was actually their plan, right?
Mhm.
The money that was produced by the wind farm would help them keep their school open. Now, they had already raised their taxes a little bit to get there, but this really put them over the top in not having their school consolidate. So the vote became about that, right? We figured out that the money was going to pay for that, and when the vote comes through, I think we almost got a unanimous vote specific to this project. I remember each of the this was specific to the municipality who was waiving a 1.5 mile setback. Uh, Said, this vote's not about the wind farm; it's about the school, right? And we have 1,000 examples of how you can make that a reality in understanding, these are economic boons for a lot of these rural counties. We talk about, that the budgets, specifically across the Midwest and portions of the South and, into the West. You've got small residencies, uh, you know, a small amount of taxing districts that, they don't have the same ability to, bring in millions of dollars through, a municipal vote. So your projects can turn um, these counties around. And even if they can't, they can provide services that, wouldn't necessarily be there without them. So translating, I would say, to just like sum it up into that specific question, Dave, it really gets down into how can I figure out what real life impact that these projects are going to have to the residents, and then turn the numbers, through these 40-page reports into those
Mhm.
things, right?
Yeah.
That comes with, I would say, it's really about listening. Um, we knock on doors and we sit at kitchen tables every day, and it doesn't take long for people to tell you what their biggest issues in the community are. And I promise you, a hot, you know, 80% of the time, it's not the wind farm or the solar farm or the best project that is the top of their mind. It's something else. And it's usually what we all care about, right? You know, taxes, education, you know, services, things like roads, right? So we want to make sure that we're translating those things into real life things that people can digest, the normal person on the street can digest, um, so that they support the project, right?
Yeah.
Makes sense how I talked about it? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, very much so. I was also thinking, share another slide quickly here. You know, the times that I see the reports are usually at the permitting hearing, right? That I'll go to testify at the permitting hearing. Sometimes I go to landowner meetings. Sometimes there's open houses early on in development of project. But what I most of the time miss that I think you and your team do a lot is those one-on-one, meetings with stakeholders and being able to have a handout and numbers to talk with people about. Could you speak to kind of the effectiveness of like the various forums specifically these four that I know of that are used, and say where where are economic impacts most beneficial to moving a project along? What types of meetings, and how is that different from meeting to meeting?
I would say that economic reports are the basis of every meeting you take, whether, it's with stakeholders, with um, directly with advocates or residents at the doors, with landowners, with elected officials. I think that the basis of what you're going to talk about as far as benefits will always come from an economic report. What you're really doing is you're translating, again, those reports into things that matter to people throughout the community. Those things can be very different, whether you're meeting with the Economic Development Council, you're meeting with somebody at the door, you're meeting with an elected official or a road use commissioner, for example. But I would say that when it comes to translating and marketing materials, I think that they're vastly underutilized. I think that typically we have, and I'm not going after any one developer, but we've seen a lot of developers. They develop a series of talking points, right? They'll walk in with a full report in their hand. They'll sit down. They'll regurgitate those talking points, and then you see the glazed over eyes. I think what it really comes down to is building those pieces into a dialogue with those stakeholders, and then translating that in a way that can be easily digested. I think that you sort of beat me to it when you put we have now this two-page report that sort of surplants not surplants but is the other side of that 40-page report, right? Is like, what's an easily digestible way that you can get to people and have them understand those things, right? I think that it's translating the bigger number, but also putting the things that we talked about, right? What are the things that people care about? So you're having conversations, you're in the community, they're telling you what they care about. You talk to the county and elected officials and decision makers, and they tell you, where that budget might go or what that might look like. And then you're putting that on a palm card, you're putting that on a mailer, you're putting those in digital ads. You're putting them, in both ways, right? Here are the raw numbers. Here's how we got to it. Here's the reference points. And then, you're also saying, whatever it is, um, you know, lower taxes, new services, or whatever else. So I think that's how we enter into dialogue and have conversations, is understanding which of those things works best, and then translating them into easily digestible is the key, right? How do I have a conversation? How do I give somebody a palm card at a door? How do I send out a mailer? How do I explain to somebody um, you know easily how that might work? I think the other thing that I really wanted to talk about is how you can go on the offensive with these things. We've been in a lot of opposition type scenarios, whether it's in hearings or within the community, where I think that we sort of, as an industry, lean back on our heels and we don't lean into the positive stories that make sense. I think that's also key. One of the examples I wanted to bring up is a project we did where we were in a county together, and the community was like, these aren't real, the numbers are fake, everything that the developer is saying is not true. I've broken down the numbers on the back of the napkin, right? And one of the tactics that we used, which I think should be used more, is we ended up doing a telephone town hall with you as the, subject matter expert. You're often used when, we're presenting that portion of our permit, right? We walk in and, Dr. Loomis sits up and he asks questions, and then, in certain places, the constituents can, cross-examine you. And, one of our thoughts was, this is the strongest port. I've heard developers say this is the strongest portion of our presentation at a hearing, is that Dr. Loomis gets up and we get to talk about all the benefits. And for that, hot, you know 5 minutes, we get the back and forth where he debunks somebody. Well, it's
Mhm.
why aren't we doing more of that? Why do we wait for the application to be submitted, to have those conversations? So one of the things that we've really pushed for, is these telephone town halls, and I think it works across all subject matter experts, but specifically in debunking the things that they're saying. So we put you on the phone. It almost worked like a radio interview. I think the first one we did, we were sitting in a development office on a project site, hoping we had good enough internet. But people called in and were able to ask you questions, right? And we basically invited both the opposition and the entire community, the ability to sit on the phone and ask those questions and have you work through it, and debunking, the back of the napkin math on, oh, this project is not actually going to bring benefits. Oh, this project, is lying towards, what is actually going to come in. Oh, the numbers were skewed, and having you sit there and say, okay, well, let's walk through it, right? And uh, in most of the cases that we've done that, and you can't say in every case because people will push on what they can push on, but in most of the cases, it totally deflated those anti-talking points towards the project, because they had a real economist on the phone who understood the numbers, because you put them together, and work through what that all means. um, and yeah, I think, going on the offense, making sure that those numbers are out there, talking about the positives. And there's a lot of ways to do that, whether you're approaching somebody at the door, whether you're putting a subject matter expert on the phone. You don't have to wait for the hearings. You don't have to just pass out 40-page reports. Make it easily digestible. Go on the offensive. Make sure when you're at a door talking about these numbers that they're translated into real life things, and have that conversation with somebody at their kitchen table, have that conversation with, the local economic development council, chamber of commerce, farm bureau, whoever it is. um, there's no better way to win a project, than make it about the things that people care about, and aggressively go after, making sure that the narrative matches, what your project is bringing. So I don't think that we do that enough, and I think that it's actually, been an issue where, developers, they get, again, it's the industry has grown, and half of them have 5 or 6 projects, right? And you go in and you drop off a report, and so often you have the county say, "What does this even mean?
Yeah.
Explain to me how you got these numbers." If you're, I mean, a matter of good development is spending time in the community, having these conversations, and really getting down into the nitty gritty on what, community impacts actually look like to their community, right? What's going to happen in New Mexico or Iowa or Ohio or Illinois or New York, all very different, depending on how those taxing bodies are set up. Um, and if you can translate those in a reasonable way, you're going to come off as, not genuine. And you want to be partners with, these places for a long, long time. Uh, and the best way to do that is build trust, listen from the beginning, and make sure that you're articulating yourself in a way that, builds that trust and community with what you're doing from your economic reports. Was I on
And one
track?
of
What you say?
Yeah, one of the things I was thinking of really helps that I've seen coming across for communities is is stories, and to make the numbers really live. I remember there was one hearing where a wind turbine technician who was from the local area, it was actually from the next county over, that was working on a project for the same developer, who kind of could tell their success story of, hey, I grew up in such and such a school, and I grew up in the local area. I went to the local community college for wind turbine technician training, and then I got hired on at the company. And with the implication of those same things can happen in your county because they happen just the next county over. And so the fact that they could talk about, no, this is where I grew up, this is my hometown, and I got to stay here, was so impactful. Or landowners who can then say the payments that I'm getting out of this project, is really going to save the farm for the next generation. Oftentimes it's people that are 60, 70 years old who are all already active farming, but they're like, I can't continue to do this year after year, and I'm not sure that we're going to be able to make it. But these payments really are making the difference between having to sell out and not farm anymore versus being able to continue keep the family farm. If you seen stories like that have been
Yeah,
effective, and how do you find those in the community?
I think that I think well, that's a two-part question. I think that third-party validators are the most um, one of the most important pieces to how you communicate with a decision maker, right?
Mm-hmm.
You are not from that place. You walk into a community where they don't know you, they trust their neighbors, right? So if you have, somebody who's against it, well, you're more likely to trust your neighbor than the outsider. So finding third-party validators in communities is wildly important. How do we find them? I mean, I think it's really just being in the community. It's time spent in the community. I think one of the biggest mistakes that you'll see is that, people go in and they knock doors real quick and they want an immediate result. Or, the worse than that is trying to develop by proxy, right? I want to make a phone call from, 500 miles away into a project site. The best way to find people in the community is to be in the community. Spend your time at the local, diner. Spend your time, setting up meetings with stakeholders. Build real, lasting relationships. A lot of the people that, um, you know, are some of my best friends today are from project sites. I just had somebody down fishing with me in Florida who um, I met in Illinois 10 years ago, right? And I met him, at a local restaurant. He ended up supporting the project, and he's been a great friend of mine, right? So being in the project site, real grassroots means building real relationships, and the reason they come off as real when these people call their local county board member, or they have a conversation with the local planning commission, is because I'm actually taking the time to build out a relationship, a friendship, a long-term relationship with them. And, so are the developers on the ground. It's not what I would say, and I tell developers this all the time. It's not that it's hyper complicated. It's just, it takes commitment. And those third-party validators too are useful across, I've been doing this for a decade, and I will say some of the best third-party validators are people you talked about, from neighboring counties. Well, I'll give you a specific example. And he's from your home county, and he's for, a lot of the recall team and management lives in Bloomington Normal. So I'm going to just use Jim Solner as a great third-party validator. Jim, he lives out in Ellsworth. He's the road use commissioner. He's on the county board, was vice chair of the county board. And he lives not 500 feet from a wind turbine, right? So when people come in, how we sort of, reacted with Jim is He showed up at a bunch of hearings, and he's like, none of this is true, right? I live next to a wind farm, and I also am the road use commissioner. So yes, the money really did come through, and our roads, yes, are better. And we set him up for an interview where we were trying to get neighboring counties at the time, who have all seen their own, wind farms come through in the last decade. He had a great line where he said, "Nobody likes to see change, but people like to feel the change in their pocket." Um, and him, reaching out to him and using him as an example, we'll have, county board members in Ohio, Indiana, New York reach out to their fellow, county board members, a county over, two counties over, and say, hey, we worked with this developer before, and guess what? They were true to their word, and we actually have seen the benefits. It's one of those things where, again, if you're spending your time in the community, you're building real trust. As a matter of good development, that builds, and you can use some of those people to convince some of the newer projects of the benefits that you're bringing because they're real. So I would say, um, you know, that's how we find them. That's how we use them, and having them tell their stories and give a narrative that's hyper personal again gets back to what we sort of said in the beginning. It's like the numbers are very complex for people to understand, but if you're building out personal stories through those numbers, jobs, you know, benefits to schools, benefits to local taxing districts, again, roads, libraries, um,
Yeah.
fire stations. Um, those are the types of things that really matter when you're talking to a board, and those are the things that they really want to hear about. I cringe a little bit when I hear somebody get up there and go, $21 million and $5 million here and $10
That's
million.
me.
Yeah. No, but I think, but I don't think it's you. I think that you do very well at explaining what that all means, taking it from a high level and funneling it down into the very specifics. And I think how we've worked together so well is that, you know, I've probably made 1,000 calls to you, or probably not 1,000, but several hundred, where I'm asking you, what does this actually mean? And you explain to me, how it affects a certain portion, and then you're taking that and you're translating into a person who then, when they step up at a hearing, and we had a hearing 2 days ago where I think we had 20 speakers, and they all, a lot of their speeches come from, what it's going to mean to them, and those speeches started with, okay, here's the things that are going to change in the community from that economic development report, right? We had a librarian, 2 months ago who stood up and said, here are the issues I'm having. We have after school programs that, work you know, for local kids. And, this is going to mean X. A very small portion of the budget, right? But hyper impactful to those people who are engaging. And you get into those local community groups, right? Like the parent teacher organizations, the superintendent of schools. I know that everybody reaches out to the superintendent of schools, but when you knock on doors and you talk to parents about the money that their schools are getting, you're not just talking about, raw numbers. You're talking about educating their kids, right?
Mhm.
So if you can put it in that way, um, you'll be surprised how many supporters you gain, even if they are wary of change and new technology. So.
Yeah, that I had that on the next slide, just the school superintendents explaining how they're going to use the additional tax revenue. Oftentimes, I've heard numerous times where the school superintendent will say, if you were at the school board meeting last month, we had to lay off, 5 teachers with hopes of rehiring them in the fall, but they're technically unemployed for the summer. If this project comes through, I'm going to be able to rehire, those teachers. Or I've heard people, talk about, music programs that got cut, or sports programs that had to get to the budget, and these projects tend to be in rural communities where the budgets are getting very, very tight, and anything extra beyond the basic education and teachers in the classroom and things. And as you go to the school buildings, you've probably been in quite a number. I've been in a lot of rural schools. There are times that I have these flashbacks to, I remember being, in the boys' room when I was in elementary school and had these kind of bathroom fixtures. I'm 62 years old. These schools literally have not been updated, have not been changed, significantly remodeled, in 50, 60 years. And so there's a great need for additional funding, especially in the schools. The other I was going to point out was union leaders, to be able to explain, because oftentimes I have a struggle when I'll do an economic impact report, and the biggest numbers on any of these renewable energy projects are the jobs during construction. And so I have to explain usually that jobs during construction does not equal construction jobs. Now, the bulk of those are indeed construction jobs. They are construction workers, on-site workers, but this includes all of the spending and the jobs associated with that spending that are going to come through during that construction time period. But I've heard and you've probably heard this as well from different decision makers, people who look at the numbers and they discount the hundreds of jobs and just say, well, those are temporary jobs, as if dismissive and so forth. And I think the most effective thing that I've heard from union leaders coming in to say, no, my guys in the laborers union or carpenters union, we make a living of temporary jobs. Like, this is full-time, whole career, and that's just the nature of construction jobs. You do not have a construction job where you spend 40 years at the same site. I was going to make a joke. We won't disparage anybody else, but you move. It's the nature of construction to move from one construction project to another, and I think union leaders can make that really tangible to people, and talk about their own communities and people who do this for a living, and how this is going to help them fulfill that lifelong career with these temporary jobs.
Yeah, I think that I'll steal a line from Mike Matika, who you also know, who used to show up to a lot of my hearings when I was in Central Illinois. He said, we're not building medieval castles here, guys. A strong economy brings projects like these and a lot of others. It could be highways, it could be schools, it could be roads, but private investments like these, we're not only building those, we're building all the things along with those. So a strong economy builds, moving from project to project to project. And you're right, over the course of, you know, um, your career, you're going to build a lot of things. Um, but these projects have been a boon for, again, specifically Midwestern states, specifically rural areas. One of the funniest things about, and I'm going to use a dirty word here with the IRA, is that 80% of those go to heavily rural Republican districts. And a lot of those jobs are construction jobs, but a lot of those jobs are jobs that are full time too. So, you know, um, we have one of our leaders at our company who sits on the board of a technical college in Indiana who does nothing but advise on wind tech and solar tech jobs that are growing across the Midwest. And you said something earlier that I'd really like to touch on. It's like, you know, one of the biggest worries in rural communities is that the average age of a farmer is 60, right? A lot of their kids are moving to urban areas, and a lot of the pushback we get is about having open ground to make sure that projects, provide, or excuse me, that the community has jobs for their kids, right? So I
Mhm.
think there's, you know, that whole piece is, are we providing local jobs? The answer is, as we grow out, we are providing local jobs, and that wind tech jobs are real, solar tech jobs are real, right? Is it a ton of jobs? Um, Maybe not, but if you're building a lot of projects and you have an economy with a large tax base, you can see wild changes in how a community runs and what else it attracts.
Mhm.
McLean is one of those, but McLean always had State Farm and Country Financial and Illinois State University. But if you go just south into Logan County, I mean, 10 years ago, I remember walking in and saying, Logan County is a great county, by the way. But after seeing several wind projects come through and seeing, funding to local schools, lower tax rates, you saw them bringing a ton of new industry. Um, and what used to be, that average boarded up small rural town that sort of breaks your heart turned into a place where, you see a lot of people walking down the street. It became a bedroom community for where you wanted to send your kids to school. And a lot of that started off with, projects I didn't even work on 15 years ago, and then did continue with projects I did work on, right? So when you build out, a local counties or townships economy starting with these projects, and you do see better schools, and you do see, um, you know, uh, lower taxes, and you do see more services, people tend to flock to that. I mean, we used to have a saying that, the two biggest indicators of people moving to a place are schools and taxes.
Mhm.
And the great thing about these projects is they're not sucking up water, sewer, extra seats at schools. They're just, you put them in, and you're just dumping a ton of money into the tax base. So I think that we talk about construction jobs a lot because our union friends love to talk about those jobs. But you, after 10 years in the industry, I've really seen a lot of the communities that I worked in grow exponentially. I mean, Lexington is one of those places, right? I
Mhm.
mean, you gone to downtown Lexington lately? They have like fancy restaurants now. It's it was really funny because one of our VPs like, we got to go to this restaurant, and as you roll through Central Illinois on your way to the project, I was like, okay, he's like Lexington. I was like Lexington, and sure enough, I mean, that the town has taken off, and it
Yeah.
started with a wind project. So
Mhm.
those are just some of the places that I grew up, and you see the changes have been incredible. Um,
Yeah.
so I don't think we talk about that enough, and that
Yeah.
you can really see change. It doesn't come in a year or 2 years, but I mean, what Logan County has brought in as far as new industry has brought in thousands of jobs, and all that started with, again, a massive influx of cash from renewable projects that turned into better schools, lower taxes, which then became bedroom communities, for, your Champagnes, your Bloomington Normals, your Springfields, not as much Springfield, but the other two, yes. And then, and then industry moved there. Uh,
Yeah.
and and then with industry came small business. So when you grow the economy, it's organic, but it does, that big injection really matters. I don't think people talk about that enough, and I don't think the narrative is explained enough. One of my favorite things to do is talk to a local decision maker about. Let me show you about this place, and let me put you on the phone with somebody who's gone through it, who's sitting in your chair, had a tough decision, had a lot of people who didn't want change, who were upset about it. Have a conversation with that person and ask them, how hard it was to make a tough decision where your neighbors were like, don't do this. And now those same neighbors are like, do more of this,
Yeah. One
Yeah.
last question before we get to the Q&A from the attendees. How do you face when people come to you and you're talking about the numbers, and they're like, these are all made up. They're not real. We can't depend on those. And do you find that that happens more with like the jobs numbers or the property tax numbers, or do you see it kind of equally across the board?
I think that it really depends on, I think that you get opposition who looks for pieces that stick. Um, so a lot of it is throwing spaghetti at the wall and figuring out what thing riles up other people the most. But I would say that the jobs number is probably number one, property is probably number two, and number three is localized benefits into the base. Um, uh, and how do we fight that? I think that we fight that by what we talked about earlier, is being a lot more on the offensive. Bring your SMEs in early. And it's funny you mentioned property taxes, because the other person that I brought on to do this similar to you, I brought you on to talk about economic numbers. Well, we brought on Mike Maroos as well, to do the property tax side and talk through those pieces. Right. So
Mhm.
bring your SMEs on early. Why are you waiting until the hearing to fight back when the narrative is already set? And it doesn't take a lot. You can do a lot of this remote. You can have somebody on the phone who, you can be in Bloomington, the developer can be on site or in an office, and we're calling out and we're answering questions. And the best part of that is not the opposition who drills you with the questions, right? Um, it's all the people that dialed in to listen, who are the spectators saying, I'm trying to figure out whether this is true or not. And having you answer in depth, you know, how you got to the numbers, what that means, and building out that narrative. That's, when I would say the opposite of the personal story, um, really makes sense when you have an expert on the phone who's working through the numbers. So I would say that those are the things that work the best. When you talk about jobs, I think that again, you hit the nail on the head. The best people to talk about jobs are the people who are constructing projects, who are working on as wind techs. Having that group of people, landowners. Everybody loves landowners. I don't know a developer who doesn't lean on their landowners.
Yeah.
But having them come out and say, this is changing the way I farm. This is allowing me to pass down, 200 acres to my kids. This is, mailbox money for me to retire. You know, those things are important. So I think those are where you're getting the third party validators that we talked about on those pieces, but also being on the offensive about the municipal numbers um, is wildly important. So, and you getting
So
down
I
into
think there's a question in the Q&A
yeah,
that maybe I'll bring Ethan back in, that was talking about the town hall, which I think is fairly unique. So do you want to ask that
Yeah.
question?
Yeah, we've had a couple questions in our Q&A, so we'll dive into that portion. One attendee is asking, what are the benefits and drawbacks of hosting a town hall via phone instead of in person?
yeah. I guess it's I prefer the telephone town hall when it comes to an SME. I think that opposition tends to show up to regular. Not, I'm not. By the way, I'm not against holding a town hall in person. But when it comes to an SME, I'd rather have the telephone town hall, and here's why. I think that if you have an SME, the most people who are going to show up to that town hall is opposition who's meant to shout down that person. Telephone town hall gives you a sense of order, is the first answer, right? We screen all the opposition calls. We're answering their questions, right? But we're going to screen callers on who's going to ask a question, and we're going to make sure that they ask their question in there, and then Dave answers, and we move on to the next person. So it gives you the control to make sure questions are being answered in earnest and honestly, but not we're not trying to get Dave into a back and forth. The other reason I really like the town hall more than the in-person town hall is because you dial out to all the people who, and we also advertise, right? So we send out a mailer with the dial-in number. Weeks before, it's advertised on your social media accounts. We're telling all the stakeholders to be on, right? Like, the decision makers, again, Farm Bureau, Chamber of Commerce, Economic Development Council, whoever, right? And it allows the people who wouldn't show up to the town hall to sit on the phone and listen in a greater number. Um, so I like, for when it comes to SMEs, I like telephone town halls or a webinar or however you want to do it. But I like the idea of maintaining control in a way that it doesn't become a shouting match of somebody who's just angry. When it comes to the in-person meetings, and you'll probably hear a lot of people say this. I know developers have really adopted this, and I do like it. Is having the station-based SMEs, right, where somebody can, and it's for the same reason, so that you can have conversations as you move to the different stations, and people are getting their questions answered. I think that's also a really great tactic. Um, but
I'm
I think,
just going to jump in there just from kind of having done both from a an MSE perspective. You when I go to an open house, I may have some just a few very good conversations, but oftentimes people don't know what to ask. They want information, they read your poster, and then they're thinking of a question to engage you. And I think the advantage of the town hall via phone is you can be a lurker. You're just listening, and somebody else is doing the hard work of asking detailed questions. And the times that I've been on town halls, they've been really good, perceptive questions. They may be in opposition, but they're bringing their best shot at. Well, you didn't do this. Do you take into account that? Well, what about this? And so forth. So we can. It's before it's like at a permitting hearing, but they're asking, I think, legitimate but very good and pointed questions, while you've got another 50, 60 people just listening in on the conversation. And at your best at an open house, you're just one-on-one with that person, and there will probably be 20, 25 people at the open house that would have liked to hear my answer to that question, and they couldn't think of a question themselves, but they're like, yeah, that's a good point. Let's hear what he has to say. And I find I like those because I guess because I'm comfortable in the analysis and I've thought through all of the things. So there, people sometimes want to have a gotcha moment. Okay, yep, I figured out the flaw in your analysis. And no analysis is perfect, and I'm perfectly comfortable with that. But I think it enables you to have a wider audience, and hopefully people that are undecided, that are like, well, I just want to hear the answers to my questions and get them answered, but I don't want to have to do the hard work of thinking it and being put on the spot, to this one-on-one dialogue. So I think that provides some advantages, and certainly provides advantages to me, because now as I go all over the country and travel, that's a lot of work to do an open house and expensive, as opposed to being on the phone and answering questions from my office. That ends up being very much more cost effective. I think even with the advertising you do to try and get people there, you don't have to provide them dinner. You don't have to provide them any refreshments and snacks and things in that format. So your money can go towards advertising and other things to try and get people to attend the town hall via phone.
yeah, that's a great point, Dave, that I have not seen from my perspective. So, uh, yeah, that's awesome.
We've got
Fastballs.
we've got another question here from Brooke Millis. Brooke, it's good to see you on here. Brooke asks, when working on a project with open vocal opposition, what are some tactics you can use to deflate opposition by highlighting specific economic benefits? How do you change the conversation from the project to the issues of concern that the project can help to address?
Yeah, I think we addressed that a little bit earlier in the call in saying that, I think it's two parts, right? I think it's being what we just talked about, and that's going on the offensive, answering their questions openly, publicly, and honestly. And how Dave said he's like, I want the hard questions, and I want everybody else to hear me work through them. That's a great way to deflate the opposition. And then to what we talked about earlier in the call, getting to the root of what those things pay for, and what real benefits are you bringing to the community. So if you're cutting down negative talking points by answering them in earnest, and Dave does great at that because nobody understands that the numbers better than him, and then moving it into the positive, right? Here's what this actually means for your community, and these things are great. And then the third part I'll throw in that Dave mentioned that I sort of brought up because I liked it so much was the third party narrative being, and that's how this is personal to me, whether I live in the county next to you or, I'm working on as a wind tech and I live here or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the things that we've done is to do a few studies to go back and highlight the benefits that have come from existing projects. So people were always kind of forecasting or projecting out for a new project that is yet to be built. And the question becomes, how can you know that those are really the benefits that will be coming to the community? Well, the best way you can do is to say, well, let's look at other communities now that have had wind, solar, battery storage, transmission projects. What benefits have they seen now looking back? So as you have some projects that are a couple years old, what were the benefits coming through construction? What are the property tax revenue? Those are public records, especially the property tax records. The jobs numbers are harder to find because that's the developer has that, or the construction company knows how many construction workers they hired. So it becomes less visible and not publicly available. But the property tax numbers, you can look up the property identification number of any wind turbine or a solar farm. They put those all together and say, okay, who's paying it? What's the equalized assessed value? What did they pay in taxes last year? And we do, kind of a true up to say, is our methodology aligning with what we had predicted would be into the future? And so, yes, you can go back and say, these are the benefits, and here's how we've seen these benefits playing out in neighboring counties or neighboring states, and cite specific examples. Will that turn vocal opposition into supporters of the project? Maybe Jonathan has better luck with than that, but I think it at least quiets. I've always said that when I go to a permitting hearing, if I get the public comment that, well, it's not all about the money, then I feel that is my job. Now I have passed the baton on to some other subject matter expert to say, wind turbines are not noisy. The shadow flicker will not exceed this level. It doesn't have health impacts. If they get to the point of saying, well, because I feel like I've proven my point, is this does bring community benefits, of the orders of magnitude that our report has saying. And so people who don't want the project then have to move to other areas to poke holes in that. And does it win the project? No, they're going to go find some other subject matter expert to beat up because they can't beat up economic impacts. But it is the most positive thing that you can put forward and continue to beat the drum because the numbers are on your side. The benefits and you brought up a good point, Jonathan. The spillover benefits, we don't even capture or pretend to measure to say once you get a project and then the knock-on effects like you were talking about Lexington, where you have a whole community that builds up, that doesn't happen overnight. And I can't, as an economist, say, draw the straight line that says here's cause and here's effect and so forth. But there's lots of contributing things. But if it weren't for that wind project to get that tax base, I don't think you would have seen the growth in the time frame that we've seen it in a community like Lexington.
Yeah.
Well, I just have one more question from me personally. This is not from the audience, but Jonathan, I remember a couple years ago you presented at our Illinois Renewable Energy Conference and did a presentation on misconceptions and misinformation that gets spread at a lot of these hearings. You shared a slide, and there was probably like 50 different bullet points of all the different topics that you've heard over many years in doing these. It was one of those moments where all of the attendees like grab their phone and take a picture, and you could just see like people are really engaged with the session. So that stuck out to me, but I did want to circle back to the different misconceptions and misinformation that gets spread, especially as it pertains to the economics of these projects. I know we already touched on one of those topics being, these are only quote unquote temporary jobs with the construction jobs. Another thing that I've heard come up, and Dave, maybe you can speak to this a little bit, is the state aid decreasing with the school districts, and that is an issue in Illinois. I know that gets into the. We may not have time to dive too deep into that topic, but maybe you could touch briefly on that. But I'll open it up first to Jonathan. Do you have other types of misconceptions or misinformation, especially when it comes to the economics of these projects that you've seen?
Yeah, I think that they'll swing on opposition will swing on anything, right? I think again the jobs and the property values are probably the biggest, but yeah, I mean, and Dave touched on it a little bit, but it's really important. It's bringing all the numbers into question with the municipalities, what they'll actually get. They'll get into what the nameplate capacity on the wind is, and then try to do, like I said, the back of the napkin math. But it always start with it's not the numbers they say it is. These numbers are overhyped. We've seen in other communities, or which they usually get from an opposition network on Facebook. But it'll be directly to, the school's not going to get this much money. The local, fire department isn't going to get this much money, or they'll go the opposite way and say it'll cause so many problems that, we're actually spending more money on X,
Mm.
right? And to debunk those, you really have to get down into having, an expert talk through the numbers, and that's where we go back onto the offensive pieces, right? I'm going to use a very specific example where Dave did the report. Somebody else took down the opposition in this specific instance. The legal counsel did, but we were working a wind project, and he's running over the numbers of the wind project. And he's like, actually, the numbers, are really not going to be what they say they are because, um, you know, farming the ground produces X, and the wind farm produces Y. And then the council came back and said, well, you're assuming that all the acreage will no longer be paying taxes. They're still farming all that acreage, right? Each turbine location is actually only taking out, a half an acre to an acre. So all that farmable ground where the farmer is still farming is still taxable. So did you account for that you're going to be getting both? And the guy freezes up and in the hearing is like, I did not. And it's like, well, uh, that's what happens when, you start trying to play with the math. So that's a very specific example of somebody just saying, uh, you know, it's not going to produce anything, right? Um, and again, a lot of that comes from back of the table math. And I know, Dave, you've probably had, the how do we call it? Amateur economist ask you about 10,000 questions. You're like, no, way off.
Yeah.
Uh, But I think that's the biggest problem when it comes to things outside of those bigger numbers, is that somebody sat down, tried to figure out a way, or a lot of them in earnest are trying to like run the numbers themselves, and they just don't know how it works, and they'll come up with and create a hyper negative narrative um, that's just not based in fact. And the only way is to have somebody who actually put the numbers together, cut that down. And what I would say, going back to what we've been saying, is you have to do that early, right? The same way somebody, when you knock on their door, you sit at their kitchen table or stakeholder or a county board member, they will tell you they are very, if you listen, a lot of the times they will tell you, I heard this. We make a note of that, and you go back to Dave or well, no matter what it is, the that SME, and you say, okay, this is what we're hearing in the community. This is how they got there, and you address it directly. Um, but I like that example because it was so ridiculous, and we had a room full of 100 people who were like, oof. And as Dave said, it's like, well, you've done your job when the project is like, well, it's not just all about the money, right? It's about, visual impacts or this or that. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think, for the give an example of, you know, talking with the school superintendent, you need to be able to talk, you need to know state aid in your particular state, how it works. But the key thing is to get to those local stakeholders, the local authorities, and be credible to them. So I've had tons of conversations with school superintendents and say, okay, here's your formula for how in Illinois it's evidence-based funding, other states it's just direct school aid. Here's how the funding formula works. Here's what the wind or solar project is going to do to your local tax base. Here's the repercussions in terms of your state aid. And here, and once you run them through, the school superintendent knows these numbers for their school district like the back of their hand. They understand how the state funding formula works, and they know their local property taxes. So if you can just lay it out for them, then they become the authority, and they go to the meeting, they go to the school board and say, no, I've run through the math. I know the spreadsheet. Everything that this guy, Dave Loomis, is telling me clicks with what I know of how the system works. So they then feel very comfortable. They do I'll send them spreadsheets. You want my spreadsheet? Look at my spreadsheet. We can do, no sense in you redoing things. You can redo everything, and they'll go through very diligently, but then they become the local stakeholder. So they go to the school board to say, no, you can't say that. It's going to bring in money. So you might not like it. We might not vote in favor of it, but it will, bring in an extra $1.5 million a year to us as a school district. So, they run through the numbers, and then you have that double stamp of approval in the local community, because whatever the school superintendent says is kind of the truth regarding schools in the local area. So that if you can get to them early and run through that, but that causes you got to be an expert in education funding. I feel like I've gotten a second PhD in education funding, and then agricultural. How does ag land get valued, and what's the diminished value to ag land and things? So there's a whole bunch of things that are adjacent, but you really got to be well versed in it to be able to communicate to those stakeholders in a credible way.
Yeah.
Well, great. Thanks everyone for hanging out here a few minutes past our time. Appreciate the attendance and the questions. And thank you to both of our speakers for your expertise and sharing your experiences with our attendees. This session is being recorded and we'll have that ready for all attendees soon, and we'll email out a link to you once it's ready. We do plan to have more webinars throughout the year, so please feel free to follow Strategic Economic Research on LinkedIn, and our experts here are active on that platform as well, so feel free to reach out to them as well if you have other specific questions. Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks for having me,
Thank
guys.
you.